Just waiting for that notification to come up. As the meeting is now recording, I will now take the sederunt for the Housing and Technical Resources Committee of the 8th of December 2021. I've noted that we already have Councillors Brown, Buchanan and Kalikis present. Is Councillor Carmichael with us? No. Councillor Chalmers is here, as is Councillor Convery. Do we have Councillor Cooper with us?
Yes.
Thank you. And I have Councillor Corbett and Councillor Devon present. Councillor Donnelly has submitted apologies. Is Councillor Falconer with us?
Yes.
Thank you. And we have Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Fulton, Councillor Gray, Councillor Greenshields, Councillor Holford, Councillor Horsham, Councillor Lennon and Councillor Logan with us. Is Councillor McGavigan present?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. And Councillor Nelson? No. Councillor Razik is with us. Councillor Ross? No. Councillor Shearer?
Present.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Walk? Oh, I can see on the attendees Councillor Walk is present, and Councillor Wilson is here. Thank you. I'll now pass you back to the Chair for today's business.
Thank you, Helen. We'll move on to agenda item 1, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations? If there are none, we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is minutes from the previous meeting. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? If there are none, I'll move them as a correct record.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to the monitoring items. Agenda item 3, which is the revenue budget monitoring for the years 2021-2022, excluding the housing revenue account. And Hazel Goodwin will speak to this report. Hazel.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide information on actual expenditure against the revenue budget for housing and technical resources, excluding the HRA, and the period we're covering is 1st of April 2021 to 8th of October 2021. That's our accounting period 7. This is the third report we've brought to committee for this current financial year 2021-22. And we have, as normal, appendices A through to D that gives details of the financial position, including Appendix D, the additional COVID-19 costs. If I could refer you to section 5.1 of the report, we're noting there that as at the 8th of October, we have an overspend position against the phase budget of 0.252 million. This overspend is caused by the additional expenditure in relation to COVID-19, including such things as the costs of additional temporary accommodation for homeless people. That overspend is covered in the additional funding provided by Scottish Government, and that's detailed in the Executive Committee COVID reports. Just noting that the property services section continues to incur fixed costs and those required to be offset by income recovery. The estimated value of that to 8th of October 2021 is 4.797 million. If I could refer the members back to section 2 of the report, I asked to note the overspend of 0.252 million as at the 8th of October, and also to approve the one proposed budget environment in there, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Are there any questions in relation to the report? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
We'll move on to agenda item 4, which is the revenue budget monitoring report for the years 2021-2022 for the housing revenue account. And Hazel will speak to this report again. Hazel.
Thank you, Chair. Again, the purpose of the report is providing information on actual expenditure against the revenue budget, this time for the housing revenue account, and covering the same period, 1st of April 2021 to 8th of October 2021. Again, third report to committee for the current financial year. At section 5 of the report, I'm noting there that there is a break-even position against the phased budget. Again, just reminding that those fixed costs of the property services section are still being incurred, so it's likely that we may require a recharge at the year end to the HRA revenue account, but we'll continue to monitor and work out what that requires to be. Again, on this report, I would refer members back to section 2 of the report and just ask you to note the break-even position as at the 8th of October 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Are there any questions or comments? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 5, which is the capital budget monitoring report for the same period, 2021-2022, this time excluding the housing revenue account. And Lorraine will speak to this report.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, committee. The agenda item then is again the third capital budget monitoring report for the General Services Capital Programme and starts on page 29 of your papers. This report provides detail on the budget and spend position to the 8th of October 2021, which, as Hazel has explained, is our accounting period 7 in the financial year. Section 3 of the report provides the background to the programme and advises that the budget reported at the last Housing and Technical Resources Committee was 8.56 million. Since that last meeting, adjustments were approved by the Executive Committee in November. These totalled a net decrease of 400,000 and are detailed in Appendix A of your report, which is on page 39 of your papers. And that adjustment means a revised budget for the year of 8.146 million. Section 4 details the capital programme update then for 21-22. And section 4.1 notes the total capital programme then being the 8.146 million. The anticipated spend to date is noted as 1.188 million, with the actual spend to the 8th of October amounting to 919,000. So we're in a position of about 269,000 behind profile, and mainly that reflects the anticipated timing of spend on the multi-year and multi-project prioritised budget investment programme. I'll be looking then to refer committee back to the recommendation in section 2 of your report and ask that the Housing and Technical Resources budget of 8.146 million and spend to the 8th of October of 919,000 be noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Are there any questions in relation to the report? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 6, which is the capital budget monitoring report for 2021-2022 for the housing revenue account. And Hazel will speak to this report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, again, same period we're covering, 1st of April to 8th October 2021, and it's the third report to the committee for this financial year. The Housing Capital Programme totals 79.640 million. Appendix A to the report provides a bit more detail on the programme, including the funding sources. At section 5.2 of the report, we're noting that the actual spend to 8th of October is 37.431 million. And again, this includes a recharge to cover those fixed overheads of the property services section, currently estimated in there at 4.164 million. I would refer members back to section 2 of this report too. Committees asked to note the revised HRA capital programme of the 79.640 million and the expenditure to date of 37.431 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Councillor Razak.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. The first one is the materials for the cost of build for houses have been shooting up quite alarmingly. It's over 20% now on average. So is there a cost implication for future house build, or has there any work been done on this? Because if we have the current budgets, that would mean that there would be a 20% reduction in the number of houses being built. So is there something in place for this, or is this being investigated? And the second one is, I'm not sure this is pertinent in this one, but I'm going to ask a question and let yourselves decide. The future projections for the cost of energy for our buildings, because of the rate of increase with energy. I know we have contracts just now, but I'm mindful of the future costs increasing by alarming rate. Is there any work being done for that as well?
Okay, I can see Danny has his hand up, so I'll bring Danny in.
I'll probably try and cover them in reverse order.
Chair, if that's okay. Councillor Razak, the very question you're asking there about the cost of energy and getting fixed in was actually raised at the Executive Committee last week. And if my memory serves me right, Paul Manning is going to prepare a note for elected members. Going through that and explaining it. From our perspective in property, then, you know, what we will always try to do, so as well as the energy efficiency of our homes, we will continue to try and improve the energy efficiency of all our general services properties too. And you'll be aware of that through the work that's getting done through even the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee and the various carbon reduction targets that we've got over the years through to 2045 as well. So from a property perspective, we will continue to make enhancements to our property and to the equipment contained within it to reduce the actual consumption of energy and the work through finance and corporate resources in terms of tying down contracts and fixing contracts to make sure we're paying I suppose as little as we can be in that regard. Hopefully that answers that question. And the other one, just in terms of the house building, yep, you're right. So costs are increasing in construction. For this year's programme, though, all of our contracts almost are already committed and accepted. So we're working our way through them. We're working to fix contract costs in relation to that as well. Going forward in the future, absolutely right. We'll need to look at what's coming back in, both in terms of tender costs or in some cases in terms of new build programme, we buy them in a turnkey arrangement. So we will need to evaluate and scrutinise the costs that are coming back in to make sure that we're getting value from them.
Thank you, Danny. Any further questions? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is the workforce monitoring report from May to July this year, and Danny will speak to this report.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is just to take committee through an update on attendance, occupational health, accidents and incidents, disciplines, grievances and dignity at work cases, and it will also provide an analysis of leavers through the period from August to September 2021, and it also notes the staffing watch as at the 11th of September this year. In the first section, then going through the report, it notes that the absence figure for the resource in September was 6.8%, which was up 0.6% than the month before in August, and that compares back through to 5% in 2019. So not surprisingly, I suppose, for this time of year, just under a third of that absence was down to respiratory issues, which was the biggest reason for absence in property services and the resource as a whole. And respiratory issues tend to be particularly short-term absences, with staff returning to work after a small period of time off. The main other reasons for absence are musculoskeletal and psychological, which tend more to be longer-term absences and which we continue to work through with the managers and those involved to get the appropriate supports in place to allow a return to work as quickly as possible. In terms of COVID, currently then we've got 21 employees recorded as being off with a COVID absence, and we've one employee who's recorded as having long COVID, just by way of an update for members in the current position. So managers, as the report notes, will continue to work with the council's maximising attendance policy to make sure that we can support employees to return back to work as quickly as possible. The report also notes that then the range of occupational health supports in Appendix 2 and page 41, which we use in order to encourage and help staff back to work. And it also notes that over the period, we had only 2 accident incidents in the period, both of which were minor in nature. There were 3 disciplinary hearings held. There was no appeals held by the appeals panel. There was no grievances raised, and there were no dignity at work complaints. And 15 employees left employment in the period, and all these posts are intended to be filled, and 8 leavers were eligible for an exit interview and 5 were completed. So committee has been asked this morning to approve the noting of this employment information. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Danny. Are there any questions in relation to the report? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay, we'll move on to items for decision. Agenda item 8, which is the housing allocation policy local letting plans for the years 2022-2023. And Annette will speak to this report.
Thank you, Chair. This is a standard annual report that we bring to committee to advise on performance against the letting targets. and also to seek approval for the targets and letting initiatives for the year ahead. In addition, this year, we're proposing a change to the wording of the allocation policy around the medical assessment process. Letting plans are a key feature of the housing allocation policy and ensure a strategic and flexible approach is taken that takes account of the differences in supply and demand across the local areas. Plans are prepared annually for each of the housing management areas, setting out letting targets and letting initiatives in operation. As noted in section 4 of the report, the pandemic impacted upon the delivery of services, including lettings. However, this remained an essential service, with the resource continuing to work hard to let vacant properties safely to applicants in housing need. Letting has continued during 2021, with turnover increasing and new build housing being delivered. Section 6 of the report provides an update on achievement against the letting targets in 21-22, projected to year end. Full details are in appendices 1 and 2. In general, it is expected that by year end, targets lets to both the urgent housing need and transfer lists will be achieved. Lets directed to the waiting list are projected to be slightly under target, while lets to other category are expected to be slightly above. The banded targets for sheltered housing will generally be met, with targets for the waiting list being exceeded. Variations at a local level relate to the different levels of supply and demand in some areas, along with the variations in turnover. Sections 7 and 8 of the report refer to the proposed letting targets for 22-23, which mirror the targets for this year and are detailed in appendices 1 and 2. These sections also highlight the factors which have been taken into account when setting the targets and include the continuing high level of demand for housing, with over 18,000 applicants on the housing list, the continuing high level of demand for sheltered housing, with almost 1,500 applicants on the sheltered housing list, the continuing high level of applications from homeless households in the year, with over 900 homeless applicants on the housing list, a projected increase in turnover returning to pre-pandemic levels, the ongoing joint working with RSL partners, and the contribution of the planned increase in supply of social rented housing during this year and next year. Letting initiatives allow for some flexibility in the allocation policy to address particular needs, issues, or local circumstances. Section 9 of the report provides an update on the initiatives in operation during 21-22, with no changes proposed for 22-23. Full details of these initiatives are provided in appendices 3 and 4. Finally, as noted in section 10 of the report, an amendment to the allocation policy relating to the medical assessment process is proposed. This change will enable suitable options to be considered when the current contractual arrangements end. If I take you back to the recommendations, committee is asked to approve that progress against the 21-22 letting targets be noted, that the 22-23 mainstream letting targets attached to Appendix 1 be approved, the 22-23 sheltered letting targets Appendix 2 be approved, the local letting initiatives at Appendix 3 be approved, the South Lanarkshire letting initiative attached to Appendix 4 be approved, and that the amendment to the allocation policy detailed in Section 10 be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Annette. I see we've got a number of hands up from members. I'll bring in Councillor Faulkner first.
Thanks, Chair. It's just on page 52, the priority in all the areas. Has it ever been considered that our home care workers should be considered as key workers and be down as a priority, as done in some councils south of the border? Or could that be considered?
Annette, I'll bring you back in here.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think our policy stipulates what type of worker is a key worker, so it's certainly something that we could consider going forward. And in terms of the letting initiatives, then particularly for Clydesdale, it notes that we'd be looking for obviously that kind of local connection, and that's probably the primary concern. But certainly for those who we can give priority to, then I think we've got flexibility in there, and that could include healthcare workers.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Annette. Councillor Carmichael.
Thanks, Chair. First and foremost, apologies for joining the meeting late. I didn't have a link, and Maureen Greenwood is going to look into that on my behalf. My question on this local letting plan is in relation to the allocations team that currently is in place at the moment. I feel that the allocations team are not working in conjunction with the local housing officers. No disrespect to any member of the team at all when I say this, that they have no knowledge of the local area, whereas the local housing officers have. And I believe that they should be talking to these people, particularly on certain individuals or areas that do have particular problems within everybody's ward. So that is a concern, and I would ask that should be in place, and maybe Annette confirm if it is or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carmichael. Annette, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Carmichael, for your question. I can assure members that the integrated housing option teams that we created a while back to try and improve the letting processes, the letting outcomes, have been working really well. What that did create was not a disconnect, but it did mean that the patch housing officer no longer allocates the properties, but we've put processes in place to ensure that there is dialogue and communication between the officers that are letting the properties and that they are knowledgeable about the areas and with the local teams. We've actually got a pre-allocation check that the officers will do with each other. I appreciate that during the pandemic, the teams are no longer sitting next to each other in a physical office and are doing this all virtually. But there are processes in place, and I'll take the opportunity to ensure that all our teams are reminded of that joint working that's required to make successful outcomes.
Chair, thank you very much for that, and I look forward to seeing some improvements. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Carmichael. Councillor Logan.
Thanks very much. I would just like to ask a question on the configuration of, or the proposed configuration of, medical assessments in the medical side of things. At the minute, it works well. We have an impartial medical advisor, and I've been here long enough to know that before we brought in that system, it was very convoluted and very difficult for people. And I would ask or hope that as this moves on, because it is very important that we get a very fair and equitable system for people who are applying, and it's straight across the board for everybody, that would there be maybe a possibility that not just a housing paper, but every councillor could either have a seminar or advice or whatever to ensure that we all know exactly what is going forward and what is proposed. I really think it is of paramount importance that we don't try a system and it's not working, then we've got to come back to it. I think we've got to try as best we can to get whatever system we're going to put in place done and get it working in the first go if possible. But I think it's important that everybody gets to hear what is going to be proposed in the coming months. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Logan. Annette.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Logan, for that point. And I would absolutely agree with you that the current arrangements have worked very well for us in terms of having an impartial and a consistent approach across South Lanarkshire. The current contractual arrangements that are in place, however, will come to an end in the coming months, given the withdrawal of the current service provider. We are preparing to replace the medical assessment service with a professional service that provides a fair, consistent and still an impartial approach across the whole area, and one that ensures the allocation policy that members approved in 2019 is put into effect. So that's what's really important to us. I think we will be able to bring a brief to members outlining the proposed change or the change that we will have to put into effect next year, and the wording of the allocation policy is what we're seeking to approve today to allow us to progress different options. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Annette. Councillor McGavigan.
Thanks, Chair. I had a question and a point, but my question has just been asked by Councillor Logan, so I look forward to that report coming to committee. My point is that thanks, Annette, for the report, but I'd also like to welcome the fact that local letting initiatives are proposed to continue for the coming year. 4 of the 5 areas in Clydesdale are in my ward, which is the most deprived ward in Clydesdale. And hopefully with these initiatives that we can encourage people to move back to the area or stay in the area. And through that, we can really encourage people, the area to develop and to get back the vibrancy that it once had. Because Clydesdale South has so much to offer families that want to embrace a more rural way of life. And with the facilities that we have in the area, and the quality of our schools and the quality of our infrastructure, unfortunately not the bus service, but with more people, that will hopefully improve. So I'm delighted that it's proposed, and I hope that it is approved today, that the LLIs continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGavigan. We'll move on to Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. 2 or 3 comments, if I may. I mean, first of all, kind of welcome the report. I think it does note, obviously, the continued pressures on the housing service in terms of the demand, etc., which is a warning sign we've got to keep an eye on, I suppose. Like Councillor McGavigan, I'd like to welcome the local letting initiatives continuing there. In my instances, particularly with regard to my own ward, the Cathkin Braes Tenant Cooperative initiative as well. It is actually something we need to keep account of, which is the local connection of families, if you like, which I think these allow things to be dealt with in that particular fashion. Can I take 2 points, though? One, just to echo Councillor Logan's one, and I've got some concerns about this because it seems a little odd to remove the existing provision for medical certificates without actually yet having in place the alternative. Would it not be more sensible to wait until the alternative is available and then make the alteration to the policy? It seems a bit sort of half-sided to do it this way. And the final point just relating to allocations generally. I don't know about other councils, but I certainly get quite a few complaints from time to time about the sort of tenants, to put it this way, that were put beside people. So long-standing tenants then complain about people with antisocial behaviour histories and things of this kind being housed in certain situations. Now, I know this is very difficult. It's a complex sort of issue, but I wonder if to the extent to which we have an ability to look at people's previous records when housing them, and to take some account of that in the allocation area that takes place here, because people are entitled to live in peace in their own homes. And I think some of the stuff that occasionally people have to put up with next door or round the corner is not altogether satisfactory. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Brown. Annette, would you like to respond to Councillor Brown's points?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, Councillor Brown and members, in terms of the medical assessment process, we have no option but to look at different options in terms of the medical assessment process, because the current provider is withdrawing the service that is provided. It's not our choice. So we have been looking at alternatives and working closely with the Health and Social Care Partnership around viable replacement options, and also if there's an option to have a period where before the current service is removed, that we have a period to test the new options. So we're working really hard to have that in place well before the service is ended by the current provider, and we will brief members on that. In terms of the second point, then, members might recall that when we did the consultation around the allocation policy that's in place since 2019, some of the dialogue and the debate at that time was around how we take into account someone's history in terms of housing and behaviour and conduct, and that is legislated in terms of the Housing Scotland Act. So we have to comply with the legislation, but we have got provision within the policy for us to take it into account and to suspend applications where it's within the realms of the policy and the legislation. So that currently does happen, and a paper that's coming and 2 papers' time is around the allocation policy, which again talks about the actions that we will take around antisocial behaviour, which can include a penalty around someone's opportunity to be housed by the council. So we do take that into account, but it has to be governed within the current policy that members approved, and also the legislation around how long we can take things into account for, as well as also addressing the issue around if someone is homeless, we have a statutory duty to house them regardless of our previous history. So it's quite complicated, but as we've discussed, I think, in the past, we will work around these issues the best we can and make sure we're complying with policy that's set by councillors and also with the legislation.
I wonder if at some point, Chair, we might have maybe an updated briefing on that aspect. It's quite important. I know it's complicated. It's maybe not an easy thing on that one, but certainly I would welcome something that would give me a bit more clarity, if you like, about what we're able to do in this connection, what we can't, legislative background and all that. So I don't want to put extra work particularly, but I think that'll be quite useful.
Yeah, and as Annette outlines, Councillor Brown, there is a paper in a couple of papers' time that talks in a wee bit more depth about the antisocial behaviour policy. So perhaps we can pick up some of those issues then, and if you require a further briefing following that, then I'm sure the officers would oblige. Councillor Logan, you still have your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. It's back on this medical assessment. Maybe I didn't pick it up correctly. What I was hoping for and asking for is that members of the council would be able at some point to have some input. I have my own views, which I don't want to start espousing this morning, of what hopefully that we might be able to do to make it, a fair and equitable system again. And that was all. I wasn't sure for the response if it would be put in place and we would be told, oh, this is what's happening. I was hoping and do hope that maybe we could have a look at the proposals, and if we had any suggestions that might fit in, that there would be time to tweak it to take into account what members are actually saying. It's just I wasn't sure when the response, and then we moved on to something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. Annette, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair. I think there's 2 things, Councillor Logan and members, is that we have to have something in place at the point where the current service is removed. We've been working hard with colleagues in health and social care to get a viable option, but I think it would be easy enough for us to have a discussion with group leaders around what those options are that we're discussing internally with a view to putting into place, and make sure that all members are briefed before it goes live. So that's something we can put in place.
Thank you, Annette. If there aren't any further questions, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you. Move on to agenda item 9, which is the policy and strategy review schedule, and Cameron Mitchell's.
Thanks very much, Chair. The purpose of this report is to seek approval for the policy and strategy review schedule for housing and technical resources. Section 3 of the report sets out the background, and at 3.1 notes that the schedule is reviewed and reported to Housing and Technical Resources Committee on an annual basis, with the last update to the schedule being approved at committee on 17 February 2021. Section 3.2 notes the positive role which the policy and strategy review schedule plays in meeting regulatory requirements and in supporting systematic service development and improvement, providing a clear time frame for the formal review of key housing policies and strategies, and facilitating the development of the annual work plan that's jointly agreed with the customers. Section 4.1 of the report provides an outline of the content of the policy and the strategy review schedule, which is attached as Appendix 1. The schedule sets out details of each policy and strategy, the frequency of review, and when reviews are next scheduled to take place. Section 4.3 and 4.4 in the report summarise the scope of the strategies and policies which are covered by the schedule. In terms of the next steps, Section 5.1 of the report notes that the content of the schedule will, as appropriate, be reflected in the resource and service plans for 2022-2023, and will also be used to establish a joint programme for customer engagement. I'd highlight Section 5.3, which confirms that the Housing and Technical Resources Committee will continue to be updated fully and separately in relation to the development of the individual policies and strategies contained in the schedule. I refer back to the recommendations detailed at 2.1 in the report, which are the committee is asked to approve the following: 1, that the policy and strategy review schedule attached Appendix 1 be approved, and 2, that the outcome of the policy and strategy reviews be reported to future committees in line with the schedule. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Cameron. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I wanted to ask at 4.3, it talks about repairs, maintenance and improvement, which seems to have kind of got itself reduced to just repairs when you look at the actual the appendix further down. In my ward, I'm sure it's the case in other people's wards as well, I've got a number of areas where there's either an estate management problem in terms of the outside environment, or alternatively we've got the surviving tenemental and other properties that need to have roof repairs, cladding and that sort of thing done. Now, there's not huge amounts of these to some degree, but there's a bit in almost every sort of council estate in my ward. I just wondered if there's any potential for including in the reviews we do here some element of trying to pick a time scale for concluding the roofing and cladding repairs in particular, so we can see the sort of schedule going forward, because people have been made promises on these things over a number of years. It's taken longer to do these things. They always fall behind other priorities and things of that kind. And it is actually quite significant, because we do need, I think, to provide tenants who've paid their rents for a long time with a good quality of housing. And this is something which actually rather erodes that. So I wonder if there's any potential for having timescales on all of this, that we can see just where we're going in the way that we have with the energy standards and all that as well.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Councillor Brown. Danny?
Yep, thanks for that, Councillor Brown. So you're right, we do have a number of targets in place, and in terms of good quality housing, that I would contest that we do have a good quality housing for our tenants to live in, as evidenced through the Scottish Housing Quality Standard and how we're performing in terms of the energy efficiency standard. In terms of the blocks, looking at roofs, looking at externals, then these are all based in stock condition surveys. So these are based in 5-year rolling surveys. And they're determined on the basis of the condition and what those surveys put forward. So as you can imagine, that will change year on year, depending on the life cycle that's attached to the remainder of the external fabric. And what I'm trying to get across here is it's not simply based on aesthetics. So while something may look as if it could be doing with getting replaced, it's very much based on how it's performing, how long it's expected to perform, because we need to make sure as a council, given all our other priorities, that we're spending money in the right things and we're spending it in the right way, and we're not simply just replacing things because of the way they look, whilst they've still got a life cycle left in them. So that's important that we do that going forward as well. The other part is that a lot of blocks are mixed ownership. So we can only take forward works in some areas where we do have approval or the necessary approval from owner-occupiers to progress with that. The outcomes of the stock condition surveys are what drives our capital investment programme, which will be back in February, talking to members about seeking approval. So that's part of the consultation that is ongoing, or is just concluding with the tenants and tenants' representatives about where we see the priorities lying for investment in the future, how much we're going to be spending and what we'll be spending and what we'll be doing in each area. And I'll talk members through that in February when I come back to committee. And that then, I say, is formed from the basis of these rolling stock condition surveys. So it's very difficult to put, kind of more medium and longer term life cycles on some things, because that can be prone to change. But certainly in terms of indications, then we can provide that through the update that we bring back to committee in February. Hopefully that answers the point.
Thank you very much. I'll continue this with Danny offline if I may. It's an ongoing discussion, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
We'll move on to agenda item 10, which is in relation to the antisocial behaviour policy review, and Annette will speak to this report.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to seek endorsement from committee for the introduction of the revised antisocial behaviour policy. As noted in section 3 of the report, the current policy was introduced in 2013, in line with legislation and regulatory requirements at that time. Committee approved the timeline to fully review the policy, and this took place during 2021. A key focus of the review has been to ensure compliance with updated legislation and regulatory requirements, as well as ensuring an appropriate framework is in place for the Council to respond to antisocial behaviour. Sections 4 and 7 of the report outline the pre and formal consultation stages and provide a summary of the feedback received. Members took part in the consultation process via a special awareness session in October 21 and provided valuable comments and feedback that was incorporated into the revised policy. The revised policy contained in Appendix 1 sets out the approach the Council will take in managing antisocial behaviour. The revised policy also aligns closely with the antisocial behaviour strategy previously approved and with the Council's vision. The policy is founded upon working collaboratively with community safety partners and local communities. Sections 5 and 6 of the report provide a summary of the key changes and features of the policy, which include a clearer definition of what is deemed to be antisocial behaviour, clear reference to the legislative changes that have come into place, a greater focus on a person-centred approach, including how we keep in touch with and support victims, including victims of domestic abuse, and how we will be trauma-informed. An emphasis on enforcement action under the Misuse of Drugs Act and psychoactive substances legislation is included, and also is the use of the streamlined eviction process where that would be appropriate to use. We understand the detrimental impact that antisocial behaviour can have on individuals and communities, and we recognise that Council's services need to work with partners and other agencies to tackle antisocial behaviour, its underlying causes, and to support victims. The policy won't in itself prevent or resolve antisocial behaviour. However, it will provide a framework for how Council services will respond. Subject to endorsement by Housing and Technical Resources Committee, the revised policy will be presented to Executive Committee for approval in February 22. Committee is then asked to approve that the revised antisocial behaviour policy, attached Appendix 1, be endorsed, that the revised policy be submitted to Executive Committee on the 2nd of February 22 for approval, and that, subject to approval, the revised policy be implemented from the 1st of March 22. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Annette. We have a few hands up. I'll take Councillor Carmichael first.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report. Can I point members to page 60, the summary of the key changes from the current policy? Annette, the one I'm interested in is the section where it says inclusion of legal power of granting a short Scottish secure tenancy to new or existing tenants who have a history of antisocial behaviour. Can I ask what time limit is on this short-term tenancy? Thank you.
Annette?
Thank you, Councillor Carmichael, for that question. The provisions to make a short secure tenancy are defined within the legislation. So we have used this power to create short secure tenancies. They must have a support package in place, and then they will be reviewed. I would need to confirm the period with you post-committee. I think it's either 6 months or 12 months, but I can confirm that afterwards.
Thank you, Annette. Councillor Brown. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carmichael, did you want to come back in there?
No, I just thanks for that, and I look forward to the response. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
It's really on the same subject, Chair. It's slightly odd that we're including legal power in this, but I mean, and I just clarify that we have actually been using this particular power for a little while. I wondered how often we used it, how many instances of imposing a short Scottish secure tenancy there were. It seems to be quite a powerful tool against the comments I made earlier on the antisocial behaviour situation we sometimes have here.
Thank you. Annette, do you have that figure to hand?
I don't have that figure to hand, Chair, but we can certainly provide members with a note of the provisions around short secure tenancies and also the use of that within the service.
Okay, thanks. We'll provide that after today's committee session. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to welcome this report. I think every single councillor that's here today and ones aren't have all dealt with quite distressing cases of antisocial behaviour. So I would absolutely welcome this report, and hopefully that we can actually work in a way that people have a satisfactory resolution to this. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Are there any further questions? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
We'll move on to agenda item 11, which is in relation to the integrated housing and property management system. And Cameron will speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. The purpose of this report is to seek approval to increase the establishment of the system support team to continue the implementation and ongoing support of the new integrated housing and property management system. Section 3 of the report outlines the background to and context for the report, and notes that the current staff arrangements to support ICT systems within the resource were established in 2016 as part of a wider review of the strategy and support functions. The review also included the review of existing IT systems. Since 2016, the system support team has carried out this role with a range of other key duties, including data management, information governance and year-end processes. Section 3.4 notes that in 2018, the system support team was augmented by the work of a temporary systems transition team, which was established specifically to facilitate the development and implementation of a new integrated housing and property management system. This report seeks to ensure that the system support team has the capacity and resilience to ensure effective and continuous delivery and development of all resource ITC systems over the longer term. The new integrated housing and property management system will replace the functionality of 11 outdated legacy systems which currently operate within the resource, and for the first time support for all systems will be consolidated within the one team rather than being provided in many instances by the external providers at a cost. The report proposes that all current temporary staffing arrangements to support the integrated housing and property management will come to an end at the end of March 2022, with responsibility being picked up within the expanded system support team. Section 4.1 of the report provides an outline of current service arrangement, confirms that the systems support team has a dual focus of ensuring system access and continuity of access, alongside playing a vital role in supporting the development and implementation of the new system. Section 4.3 provides a summary of the breadth and significance of the work undertaken by the system support team, while Section 4.4 notes that the work of the temporary system transition team will come to an end in March 2022. Section 5 sets out the proposal for the future delivery of the service based upon delivery by a single team, with full details of the proposal set out in Section 6.1. Section 5.2 notes that to support the new integrated system and provide ongoing support to the existing standalone applications, it's been assessed that additional resources are required, and proposes that 1 systems officer and 3 strategy and support assistants are added to the establishment. As well as the additional staffing detailed at 5.2, it's also proposed that a temporary coordinator post is added to the establishment for a period of 23 months or until the new system is operational. And this post will have a particular focus on ensuring the continued implementation and monitoring of the new integrated system as the project advisor post comes to an end. Additionally, at 5.4, it's proposed that the current temporary project advisor post be extended for a period of 6 months to provide for continuity of project management as the new integrated system is introduced and the revised system support team proposals are implemented. Section 7.1 notes the financial implications of the proposed changes to the establishment, which are a recurring cost of £168,372 and a one-off cost of £132,382 across the next 2 years. I would highlight Section 7.2, which notes that the staffing costs will over the longer term, the increased staffing costs will over the longer term be offset by the costs currently incurred by the costs associated with the current legacy systems. Can I refer back to the recommendations in Section 2 of the report, which the committee is asked to approve the following. 1, to increase the establishment by the addition of 1 full-time equivalent systems officer and 3 full-time equivalent strategy and support assistants on a permanent basis. 2, to increase the establishment by 1 full-time equivalent project advisor on a fixed-term basis for 6 months. And finally, to increase the establishment by the addition of 1 full-time equivalent system coordinator for a fixed-term period of 23 months. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Cameron. Councillor Razak.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I can say that replacing the management system, housing and property management system from 11 outdated systems is always going to be welcomed, and it's great to see that we're moving with the times as well. My question is, firstly, installation of a system can be problematic. I know it's a 2-year process that's going on just now, but my question would be that when it's moving over, the system is moving over, if there are any issues, is there a backup plan for that? And the reason for that is very recently, I don't know if you saw the media, Walkers Crisps changed their system and it crashed, and it took them a month to sort out the mess where, they had huge issues with the availability. And the second one would be that, my second question, would be the cost of the system itself, because there's no costing. There's labour cost there, but there's no cost of the system, and also the yearly cost of the system as well, because there's always a yearly fee you got to pay for that. Could I have the costings for both of them as well, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Razak. Cameron.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Razak. Firstly, in terms of service continuity, that is a key focus for us, actually making sure that as you actually move from systems that are long and well established to a new integrated system, that we're actually making sure that the services are there. And we think the proposal there today would allow us and support us to do that. And these 11 legacy systems will actually come offline at different points as well, which means that you're actually planning one at a time as we go, and just making sure at key points with a key focus on critical service provision, as well as key statistical reports for the council for the interim year end, for example. Secondly, I think that probably in terms of the wider costs, that can provide that note on the actual cost of the project, which were previously reported to committee, I think most recently in February 21, when there was a report on the new system, which had some temporary, but we could actually pass that information after the committee chair, if that was acceptable.
Yeah, that would be acceptable to me. Mo, is that okay for you?
No, that would be great. I just was puzzled why that wasn't added onto this one, because I would have given us a fuller picture.
Okay, we can get that circulated after the meeting. Are there any further questions? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Great. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda item 12, which is in relation to the asset transfer of the Low Waters Hall, and Joanne Forbes will speak to this report.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise committee of a request for community asset transfer by lease of Low Waters Hall in Hamilton to the trustees of Clyde Scouts. The Scouts are seeking to relocate to these premises, as that will enable them to offer increased numbers of sessions for children in the area and to reduce their waiting lists. The Scouts submitted their application on the 23rd of July 2021. Public consultation concluded on the 9th of September with 10 representations, none of which had any negative responses. The Asset Transfer Panel met on the 20th of October to consider the request and took into account the matters that are set out in sections 3.6, 3.7 and 3.8 of the report. Low Waters Hall is currently leased to the Leisure Trust, and they have confirmed that there are no staffing implications as a result of the asset transfer, as the hall is managed on an on-demand basis. Planning consent is not required, as this is a continuation of an existing use. And although there is no dedicated car parking associated with this hall, the Scouts are in discussions with other landowners and have contingency plans for drop off and pick up to ensure they're not causing disruption to the local residents. Although the request is in the name of the trustees of Clyde Scouts, the day-to-day management will be undertaken by the local 112th Lanarkshire Scouts, who have the skills and the capacity to secure the funding for improvements and to manage the hall. The Scouts have been keen to involve existing users of the hall with whom they've consulted and with other local organisations to ensure that it is used well. The Scouts have organised a building survey and are preparing a grant application to fund the investment in the property. The rental value is at £2,500 per annum, and the community benefit has been assessed at 67% discount to market value. The Asset Panel recommends the request for asset transfer is agreed on the terms and conditions that are set out in Section 5 of the report, namely a 20-year lease at a rent of £825 per annum with 1 year rent free, There are break clauses suggested for year 2 and 5 to ensure that the project is viable and sustainable. And the offer of lease will be conditional upon the Scouts being satisfied with the outcome of their building survey. I would recommend the report to the committee.
Thank you, Joanne. Are there any questions in relation to the report? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. I'll move on to agenda item 13, which is the Glassford Hall, and it's the asset transfer to Glassford Community Group. And Joanne will speak to this report.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise committee of the request for asset transfer by sale of Glassford Hall to Glassford Community Group. Glassford Community Group wish to develop the role the hall plays within the community, invest in the building and attract additional uses. The application was submitted on the 9th of August and public consultation concluded on the 9th of September with no representations having been received. The Asset Transfer Panel met on the 20th of October to consider the request and took into account the matters set out in sections 3.6, 3.7 and 3.8 of this report. Glassford Hall is currently leased to the Leisure Trust. However, they've confirmed that similar to Low Waters, there are no staff implications as the hall is managed on an on-demand basis. Planning consent is not required initially, however it may be required at a future date if other commercial uses, such as a cafe, are introduced to the building. Glassford Community Group are a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation and their constitution does contain an asset lock. The organisation has been established since 2014 and has over 30 members, and they have carried out extensive consultation with the local community regarding their proposals. The project and investment is phased over a 3-year period, and there are proposals for further public consultation on the design and fit out of the hall once that phase is reached. An REF application for funding for £45,000 to cover the purchase costs and the initial running costs was approved yesterday. The report notes that the hall was the polling station. However, I can confirm to the committee that we've had confirmation that the election and polling will now run from Glassford Primary School, so this is not an issue. The property has been valued at £80,000 and the community benefit has been assessed at 62%. The Asset Panel recommends the request for asset transfer is agreed on the terms and conditions set out in section 5 of the report, namely that the sale would be at £30,400. I would recommend the report to committee.
Thank you, Joanne. Are there any questions in relation to the report? If there are none, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. I'm conscious we're approaching the hour mark, but as we've only got one item left for decision, I'll ask Joanne to speak to agenda item 14, which is in relation to the land at Comley Bank, Hamilton, and an asset transfer to supporting our community. Joanne.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise committee of the request for a community asset transfer by lease of an area of open space at Comley Bank in Hillhouse in Hamilton to supporting our communities. Supporting our communities are seeking to create a community garden and food growing project on the site of a former care home. They are submitted their application on the 22nd of July and public consultation concluded on the 10th of November with no representations having been received. The Asset Transfer Panel met to consider the request and took into account the matters that are set out in sections 3.6, 3.7 and 3.8 of the report. The site of the former home is surplus to requirements and has lain vacant for around 15 years with no development interest. Planning consent will be required for the change of use, and there may be ground condition or ground contamination issues, and therefore the organisation will have to undertake investigations to ensure the ground is suitable for growing. Supporting Our Communities is a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation and their constitution contains an asset lock. and they were established in 2019 and have their base at a hub on Cumley Bank, which has a small-scale community growing project at the moment, which has demonstrated the local demand for the project. The project, when established, will help deliver some of the outcomes that were identified in the Hillhouse, Udston and Burnbank Our Place, Our Plan initiative. Funding options are currently being explored, including funding to extend the post of the development officer associated with the organisation. The rental value of the land is considered to be nominal, and although community benefit was assessed at 75%, given that nominal value, it is recommended that the request is granted on the rental of £1 per annum as asked for. The assessment panel recommends the request for asset transfer is agreed on the terms and conditions set out in section 5 of the report, namely that it would be a 15-year lease at £1 per annum. The offer of lease will, however, be conditional on planning consent for change of use, satisfactory ground conditions and funding being secured for the works to the garden. I would recommend the report to committee.
Thank you, Joanne. Councillor Faulkner.
Hi, thanks, Chair. I'd just like to welcome this recommendation. SOC are one of the half a dozen community groups in the Hillhouse area who have supported the community, especially through the pandemic. And I'd also like to congratulate them in their meaningful and proper consultation on this process, unlike some other community asset transfer applications. Thank you.
I thought we were going to get through all of that, Alan, without a slide. But no, I welcome your welcome of the paper. And if there aren't any questions, further questions, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
And as the next few items on the report are for noting, can we agree the recommendations as a block?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. There are no items of urgent business, and as this is the last committee before we break up, I'd like to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year when it comes. Thank you all for your attendance today.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Merry
Thank you.
Christmas.
Thanks, Chair.
Merry Christmas.